Hilchos Hatumos Perek Chi, the laws of the remaining primary sources of impurity, chapter 9. Today is the 9th of Shvat. It's Friday. We're pre-recording the class for Shabbos. Tomorrow is the 10th of Shvat, Yud Shvat. Yud Shvat is an extremely important day on the Chabad calendar. It's the day that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe passed away, and the Rebbe took over leadership of the Chabad movement. This year happens to be its 75 years. 75th anniversary, which even in the secular world is a big number, certainly in the Torah world, in the religious holy perspective, 75 is a big number. And on Yud Shvat, I think besides the general approach, general attitude that we have to have in terms of internalizing more of the Rebbe's teachings and carrying out his marching orders, we really have to also be grateful and simply thank the Rebbe for the tremendous amount of paradigm shifts that he's given us through his teachings. Today, it's almost mainstream in the entire world, accepted as the status quo. Things that were completely novel to the general Jewish way of thinking. The value, the intrinsic value of every Jewish soul, the intrinsic value of every single mitzvah, the idea of Jewish outreach to bring in those that are unfortunately out of the fold, into the fold, to put Mashiach on the front burner. We can go on and on. So many things that today is accepted again as literally mainstream Judaism were pretty much all of the Rebbe's radical at the time ideas. Of course, it's not radical or new. Everything is in the Torah. Everything can be traced to the sources within our holy literature. But the Rebbe put it front and center and really believed it and really lived it. And the fact that we're sitting today in Chabad of Sherman Oaks and there's 5,000 other Chabad houses around the world serving Jews from every demographic is a testimony to the eternity of the Rebbe's vision. And literally, I say thank you. And we should all say thank you. And when you say thank you, you also need to do more. You know, gratitude comes with responsibility. If we really owe the Rebbe that much in terms of the way we think, the way we live, then it behooves us to do more that would bring him pleasure. And there's nothing more that brings the Rebbe pleasure than A, personally increasing in study of Torah and doing mitzvahs, but more so perhaps, even more important, B, is influencing others to do the same. This is the gifts that we can give the Rebbe on this day, and we should commit, every one of us, that we will reflect and take on a resolution to bring that a little bit more forward in our personal lives and again, in our circle of influence as well. And with that, let's go to the Rambam, which is also a gift from the Rebbe. The study cycle of the Rambam, that in 3 years we can cover the entirety of Jewish oral law, learn all the halachas that apply in every area of the Torah. That's the Rebbe's novelty. So to learn Rambam on the Rebbe's day is a very extra schus. What are we learning about? We're learning about rabbinic impositions and the laws of impurity. Every chapter basically deals with one or two decrees. And today's chapter is also same thing. 2 rabbinic injunctions within the laws of purity. Number 1 is called Mayim She'uvim. Mayim She'uvim literally means drawn water, water that's not in its natural source. Believe it or not, there's an impurity associated with that. If you lived in temple times and you had a bath, every time you took a bath, you'd become impure. Every time you took a shower, you'd become impure, as we're going to see. It doesn't matter if the water falls on you or you go into the water. So, literally, today, it's just so foreign and so far away from us. But in those days, this was a big thing. Mayim She'uvin. We're going to see all the parameters about that. And towards the end of the chapter, we're going to get another imposition that's called the Kisvei Kodesh, the decree on holy scrolls. Remember that this is before the printing press. Jewish books were not a thing. If you wanted to write down any part of the Torah, it was all handwritten on parchment on scrolls. That was true of the oral Torah, but it's also true especially of the written Torah. As we have today, still, in every shul you have some written Torahs. This was commonplace to have a chumash, to have prophets written on scrolls. And as we're going to see, out of an abundance of caution, the sages actually imposed a level of impurity on these scrolls themselves. It sounds funny, holy scrolls, but if you touch them, they make your hands impure to a certain level. Again, out of an abundance of caution, as we'll see, so people wouldn't store scrolls in dishonorable places. So that's the 2 topics for today. Let's get right into it. Halacha Aleph. Haba reishe v'rubai b'mayim she'uvin. If somebody enters his head and a majority of his body in drawn water, and we'll soon see it's an amount of 3 log. Every log is about 12 ounces, 12, 13 ounces. So figure 36, 38 ounces. if a person enters that amount of water with his head and most of his body, or somebody poured, or it was poured onto his head and most of his body an amount of 3 log of drawn water, nitma, rabbinically he becomes impure. The status imposed is that of a sheni. Like we had yesterday with the hands. When hands become impure in the way that the rabbis make it impure, it becomes a sheni. So too, the drawn water makes you into a sheni level of impurity. Ad sheyitbal, till you go into the mikveh. If during this time, before you went to the mikveh, you touch food, asa isan shlishi. So here we have the sheni. If he touches food, he makes them into a shlishi. Because when a sheni touches other things, right, it goes down one level. If he touches liquid we know, we've seen before the last 2 days, they always jump up to the level of rishon. So if you're a sheni and you touch liquid, timan, he makes them impure, and makes them a rishon. But not with the full power of a rishon, with the power to make other food or drink impure, not utensils. Now, what is the reason for this decree? Every decree that the rabbis make has to have a reason. What's the logic here? Why did the rabbis decree impurity on such a person? And this is going to be fascinating. Says the Rambam, people, typically, when you became impure, you had to go to the mikveh to become pure, yeah? Once you go to the mikveh, you're called a tvul yom, which means you're waiting for the sun to set, then your purity is pretty much complete, unless you have to bring a sacrifice. So, what used to happen was, I guess there weren't that many clean mikvahs. Today, mikvahs are built indoors and we can afford to filter them and the whole thing. But in those days, a mikvah was in a cave. It was wherever it was, natural. So people used to end up going to mikvahs that were bad, literally bad quality, stinky water. And so, just by way of sanitary cleanliness, after you dip in a smelly body of water, what do? You go afterwards and you take a shower. Wash yourself. They would wash themselves in regular drawn water, nice water, just to be clean. But then this custom became so widespread, till some people, or many people, began to think, mistakenly, that people started to think that mikvah has 2 stages. First you go into smelly water, then you go into good water, and the good water is what finishes the purity. Not the immersion in the mikveh waters. And that caused them that in the initial mikveh, which is the smelly one, but which is actually the real mikveh halachically, they were dipping there cheaply. They weren't paying attention properly. Therefore the rabbi said, you know what? No more. Anybody takes a bath or a shower in regular clean water, becomes impure at the status of a sheni l'tumah. Then nobody can make a mistake. You take a bath, take a shower at your own risk. Sure, you can do it. You want to be clean, no problem. But the mikveh, in terms of ritual purity, happens in the actual mikveh in the cave. And then later, every time you go into this quantity of water, you become impure. This causes considerable debate today with people that go to the mikveh and take a shower after the mikveh. The question is, right, does it disqualify the mikveh? So, clearly, halachically, there's no problem. Because even in those days, the only problem was that people began to confuse the shower with the mikveh. But if you don't confuse the shower with the mikveh, there's no inherent problem with taking a shower after the mikveh. Nevertheless, Kabbalistically, one should endeavor to keep the water of the mikveh on his body and let it dry into his body. So you don't want to, so to speak, wash off the mikveh waters, and so it's preferable if you shower, as you should, before using the mikveh, but after the mikveh, at least you should dry yourself off. Take a shower afterwards, there's some room for that as well. Ideally, just the mikveh should be the last body of water that you touch for the day. But at least, if you're going to do a shower after mikveh, at least wash yourself, at least dry yourself so that you absorb the mikveh waters, and then you continue on with whatever it is that you're doing in terms of showering. Anyway, back to this. Afilu tahar she'enei tvul yom. Even a completely pure person, who's not a person who immersed that day. Think about it. The whole decree was imposed because people were going to the mikveh, were confusing mikveh with showers. But What if I'm a regular guy? I had no history with the mikveh. I'm totally pure. Doesn't make a difference. The decree extends to everybody. If 3 log of this drawn water falls onto your head, or you go into a body of mayim shuvin, you are like a secondary degree of impurity till you go to the mikveh. Nevertheless, says the Rambam, even though, and this extends to the whole decree, even though the rabbis made you have to go to the mikveh to get rid of this rabbinic impurity, taval, once you go to the mikveh, we don't treat you like a regular tefillah and we have to wait till sunset. You don't have to wait, because the whole impurity is rabbinic, so the mikveh simply gets rid of the rabbinic impurity. Similarly, the person we discussed yesterday at the end of the chapter, a person who eats impure food or drinks impure liquids, the taval, and goes to the mikveh to rid himself of that rabbinic impurity. No need for sunset to come. The moment you go to the mikveh is the moment you're pure. Similarly, utensils which became impure through liquid, which was another decree. We saw in chapter 7 that it's possible for utensils that are contacted by liquid to become impure. Once you put them in the mikveh, they're pure. No need for sunset, because all of these impurities were all rabbinic, and so they don't follow the same strict laws as biblical impurities. Halacha beis, when we talk about 3 log of mayim she'uvin falling on you, we have to define what does it mean falling on you. What happens if you had 2 or 3 utensils of water, containers of water that are pouring this mayim she'uvin on them? They didn't all come from one source. They came from multiple sources. So the Rambam says, if there was no interruption, the second container began to pour on you before the first container stopped, mitzdarfin, all the water combines, and if a total of 3 lugin or more were poured on you, you're impure. But if not, that means there was an interruption between one container and the next. Ein mitzdarfin, they don't combine, and you're not impure. Naflu me'arba kelim. What if they fell from 4 different containers? Doesn't matter, even if there were no interruptions at all. Einan mitzdarfin, they never combine. Even if one began before the other stopped, the person remains pure. Because if you think about it, when there's 4 containers, there's no individual container that had 1 log. A minimum of 1 log is required per container. So we don't combine any of the things in the 4 containers. What if the water, the three log of water, fell onto your head, but they didn't reach most of your body? They fell on most of your body, but not on your head. Or they reached your head and most of your body from 2 different directions. So maybe this bath is not the most accurate scenario, because here I have partial in the bath, partial coming on his head. This person is actually pure. Until the water falls on his head and on the majority of his body that's near his head in the natural course of water flow. So you pour it onto the head, and then when it lands, or it spreads to most of your body, is when you become impure. Same thing if you were entering a body of mayim shuvin. If just your head entered, not your body, not most of your body. Or just the majority of your body, but not your head. Or your head entered one body, and from a different side, your body, or the majority of your body, entered a different body of mayim shuvin. You're always pure in these cases, until you enter with your head and most of your body, which is near your head, in the normal way as a person would enter a body of water. What if it is covering the proper place on the body? The head and most of the body that's near the head is the one that's being covered, but it's half-half. Half of it is being covered by mayim shuvin because you entered the body of mayim shuvin. Half of it is coming down on you. So same case of the bath and the shower, let's call it simultaneously, but it is covering the proper parts. Says the Rambam, even though there's more reason here to be strict, because the Reisha Verubay condition was fulfilled. Hoyil v'chetzia b'nefila. Did I read the last words? Nafla l'chetzia acher mayim shuvin. Right? If on the other half they fell, you didn't enter them. Hoyil v'chetzia b'nefila v'chetzia b'biyah. Since half of it is through falling and half of it is through entering, harei zatar, you are pure, because the sages only decreed on a person who does either or, either enters or has it fall on him. Halacha daled hayu shleishas lugin shenaflu alav v'sheba mehen What if the 3 log that were poured on you or that you entered were miktsasan she'uvin or miktsasan einam she'uvin? They were only partially she'uvin. The other part of them was natural, completely natural fresh water. Or it wasn't all water, there was some wine, oil, honey, milk mixed into it. You are pure. Until all 3 of the lugin that are falling on you have to all be straight up drawn water. What happens to the water itself? Those 3 lug that fell on the person, or the person entered them, they made him impure. Because he became like a sheni. So what happens? When a sheni touches liquid, what do we say? These liquid become impure because they touched a sheni. Even though it didn't happen in stages. It's all simultaneous. Metaphorically speaking, in the Mishnah we say that in this scenario it's as though the water is telling the person, we made him impure and he also made us impure. Because at the same moment that you become impure through entering the water, you're now touching the water and making it impure. And this ends the discussion on Mayim She'uvin. Now we move on to the second discussion of the chapter, Kisvei Kodesh, the holy writings. Bari Shaina in the beginning, in earlier times, says the Rambam, Hayu manichin ki karesh al truma b'tzad hasfarim. People used to store truma, loaves, truma food, near their scrolls, their Torah scrolls. Why? The Oimrim, they would say, this is a great way to honor the truma. We'll keep it all pure. Zeh kodesh v'zeh kodesh, this is holy, the scroll is holy, the truma is holy. And it's not considered dishonorable to put scrolls next to truma. Problem is, you know who likes food? You know who likes loaves of truma? Is mice. Let's change the screen for a second here. Boom, there's the mice. The mice now are hanging out on this shelf. They came to eat the loaves, but they also see some scrolls, and they like scrolls. And they began to tear the parchments. And that was what's called a bizayon, a disgrace or degradation to the holy writings. The Fikach therefore said, the sages, Gazru, they made a decree, that if truma food will touch one of the scrolls of the holy writings, it will become impure. It will be classified as a shlishi, as if it touched a sheni. Which basically means that any holy writing will disqualify truma. What's called paisel. Paisel means it makes it impure in a way that it cannot pass on the impurity. Because truma goes to a maximum of shlishi. And that's the new decree. That was the initial decree. Not only that, if somebody's hands were pure, and he touches a scroll of the holy writings, his hands become a sheni. In other words, what we learned yesterday about the whole idea of tumas yodayim imposed by the rabbis, they also imposed it in touching kisvei kodesh. And therefore your hands will now bring tuma to truma which they touch, or to liquids. Even though yesterday we explained that hands rabbinically can only become impure from a source that's a risha in itself, and here we said that the scroll is like a sheni. Nevertheless, this is an exception. Hands will become impure from a scroll, so a sheni will make a sheni, so to speak. A rabbinic sheni makes another rabbinic sheni. Halacha vav, when we say kisvei kodesh, when we say holy writings, it means more than you might think. Ritzuais tefillin imat tefillin. Tefillin scrolls and tefillin boxes, tefillin straps, and tefillin boxes. The gilyain shebasefer, and even the margins of a scroll. Right, there's always a margin that has unwritten parts of the parchment. Shalamaylan v'shalamaton shebitchila v'shebesoif. Above the script, below the script, at the beginning and the end of the scroll also there's empty space. Of course, today's Torah scrolls, it's hard to see it, but if you were just using a scroll itself, when you open a scroll, there's some blank space over there. Kishahin mechubarim sefer, if they're all attached to the Torah scroll, they haven't been cut off, they're all considered to be kisvei kodesh, they have the impurity that we're talking about. Even if a scroll was erased by just wear and tear, most of the writing became erased on it, but there's at least 85 letters that have not been erased. Or a part of a scroll that has 85 letters on it. Like what we say every time that the Holy Ark opens. Vayihi bin Soya ha'ara, and this is considered to be almost a separate chumash unto itself. The way the Talmud describes it, if you've seen a Torah scroll, when it comes to that portion of Vayihi bin Soya, it's divided by two backward-facing nuns. And in some texts, it's considered to be a separate chumash. Chumash Bamidbar, the fourth book of the Torah, is divided into three. Before Vayihi bin Soa, after Vayihi bin Soa, and Vayihi bin Soa. And so Vayihi bin Soa is classified as a sefer, a book unto itself. So if any book, any holy writing, has the amount of letters in this portion, which is 85, so then, they will also communicate impurity to hands, like Kisvei Kodesh. They're classified in Kisvei Kodesh. Not only the words of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, all of the prophets, all the writings, even Song of Songs and Ecclesiastes, which seems to be mundane stuff, just life wisdom or a love story. Since they're words of wisdom that were stated with divine inspiration, of course, the deepest secrets are contained many times in Koheles and Shir Hashirim. The love story is not a simple love story, it's the story of God and the Jewish people. Koheles or Shleim is wisdom for eternity. Mitamin esayadayim, they do communicate impurity to hands as well. Halacha Zayin, Targum, Shebe Ezra v'Shebe Daniel, the Aramaic words in the book of Ezra and Daniel. This is a not so known fact just because it's not so well studied. But one of the 24 books of the Tanakh is Ezra and Nehemiah and Daniel. And many of the verses in those books are actually Aramaic. In other words, in their original form, they're Aramaic. Many chumashes or many nachs have on the side, you have Targum Unkelos, Targum Yonason, there's an Aramaic translation of the Tanakh. But many of the verses in Daniel and Ezra and Nehemiah are actually Aramaic. So the Rambam says the Aramaic verses in Ezra and Daniel, Harehu Miklal Kisvei HaKodesh, since that's how they were written to begin with, they're included in the holy writings. Avol Targum Shekosvei Ivris. But if you have words that are meant to be written in Aramaic, like those verses, and you wrote them into Hebrew, the Ivris Shekosvei Targum, or Hebrew wording, Lashon Kodesh wording, that you translated to Aramaic, or Shekosav Kisvei HaKodesh Biksav Ivri, or you use what they call today the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet, right? The ancient script that you find today on coins and archaeological sites that was clearly used in Jewish culture, but it was never used for writing Torah scrolls. So then, Einon Mitamin Esayodayim, they do not communicate impurity to the hands, Ad Sheyu Ksuvim Ashuri Al Ha'oir Ubidyoy, unless they're written in their proper way. Ashuri is the square script that we have today in Torah scrolls, on parchment with black ink, meeting all proper qualifications of a proper scroll, and then, and only then, does it communicate impurity. Halacha ches hakesev halal ushma letinek lihislamid. A person writes down the portions of halal in Psalms, it's from the holy writings, or the portions of Shema for a child to learn. Afal pisha einei rashai. Even though you're not supposed to do that, because when you write scrolls in the ancient times, today we just print books, so it's all fine. But when you write a scroll, you have to write a full book. You can't just pick and choose chapters. Nevertheless, they do communicate impurity to the hands. There's some discussion as to why that is. Leave it for those who want to do extra research. Those watching us online, if you have any comments on this, please let us know as well why this would be a case where it communicates impurity. Let's say you have a Torah scroll and you sewed on some kinds of strands or straps, which you're not supposed to do, because the Torah scroll is supposed to stay a Torah scroll, but you did it anyways. Even though you cannot keep them there, they have to be removed. Nevertheless, we go stringently, and as long as they're attached to the scroll, they will communicate impurity. Because anything attached to the scroll communicates impurity. Halacha Yud Tik Shel Sefer, a covering for a Torah scroll. Now, the word tik actually means a casing. This is like the Sephardi Torahs might have, an actual case. But the point is, any utensil, container, vessel, cloth that's meant to be covering a Torah scroll. The Teva Shel Sefer, and the ark, the big box in which it's kept. Today we have it, in front of the shul. They used to have just a box that was portable, and they would store Torahs in there. Umitbechai Svardim, and cloths which they wrap around the scrolls when they're being read. Today, we use them typically in Ashkenazi communities. That's how we wrap Torahs in cloth. But in the Sephardi communities and in ancient times, they used to actually wrap the Torahs in a casing, a firm casing. And when it came time to read the Torah, they put it on the bima, but they would cover it with a cloth. Bisman shein tfurais, if they are attached to the scrolls, sewed on, metamin esayadayim, they make the hands impure. If not, then not. Aval habrachais But let's say you wrote on the scrolls, like a siddur, blessings. Even though you have many, many letters of God, of God's name on it, or Torah topics on it, even quotes, direct quotes from the scriptures. These do not make the hands impure, because that's not called kisvei kodesh, that's not called holy writings. Halacha Yud Aleph Sifrei Minim, Torah scrolls written by people that don't believe. Minim, the Rambam has a very specific definition in the beginning of his book. There are 5 types of minim. Someone denies the existence of God, someone denies his supervision, someone denies the truth or divinity of any part of the Torah. They're not considered to be scrolls, period. They do not transmit impurity to the hands. Even today, this law is followed in certain ways. That if a Torah was written by people that do not believe in the divinity of the Torah, as is the case, unfortunately, for members of the Reform and Conservative movement, we are not allowed, they have no holiness. Their Torah scrolls have no holiness unless they're written by a regular scribe. That's reflected over here as well. Because you cannot write a Torah which you don't believe in and then expect it to carry the holiness that you want it to carry. Parsha Saita, the portion of the Saita. Remember in the end of the Rambam's 4th book, there was a tablet in the temple that they used to use when there was a woman suspected of adultery, that they used to copy from onto a parchment, the portion of the Sota from the Torah which she had to read and then was put into the bitter waters. So this scroll upon which it's written, so we're not talking about this one, we're talking about the actual scroll that was written. Since it's going to be erased anyways, it doesn't have the level of holy writings, and it doesn't make your hands impure. If you touch it, you remain pure.